when the attack by Antony Blinken happened, and it came out of nowhere.
Now, according to the outlet's website, African Stream is, and I quote, a Pan-African digital media organization based exclusively on social media platforms, focusing on giving a voice to all Africans both at home and abroad. In reality, the only voice it gives is to Kremlin propagandists.
And then the whole world just collapses in front of you. And then for the first month after it happened, I was in a bit of a daze, but then, you start to compose yourself, and then you start to feel a bit kind of honored in a way. Like the fact that they would go to such lengths to shut us down means that we were making an impact, and we were obviously threatening their interests, which is exactly what we set out to do.
Hello and welcome to Global Majority for Peace podcast. I'm Ileana Chan. Every week on this podcast, we discuss with special guests from across the world our mission of building a global movement to promote peace and challenge the US-led war drive against China, Russia, and countries in the global south. We will be posting the first 30 minutes on YouTube and the full episode on Patreon for free. So please become a patron on Patreon. And if you want to make a donation, it will just go to covering our costs. This will also be an audio podcast on Saturdays on Patreon with a transcript, as well as on Spotify and Amazon Music. This week, we have a very special guest. Ahmed Kaballo is a Sudanese British journalist and the founder of African Stream, a Pan-African digital media platform that was based in Nairobi. Welcome, Ahmed.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on to Global Majority for Peace. We like to begin each interview on a bit of a personal note. Now, you do have a pretty fascinating story, but can we just start with the origin of your politicization? Was there a particular incident? If you can't think of a particular incident, like a lot of people might find it a little bit hard to find one incident, but what is it that led you to your current worldview?
Sure. So my journey, the reason I was born in the UK is a result of politics. My father went to the UK because he got a scholarship to study his PhD at Leeds University. At the time, it was funded by the Sudanese government, a democratically elected Sudanese government at the time. And he was, at the time, it was and still is a member of the Sudanese Communist Party. So he was writing a lot about the Muslim Brotherhood movement in Sudan, and how they're going to try and take power, and how the Sudanese people need to organize and protect the fragile democracy that they have. And as he predicted, the Muslim Brotherhood came into power in 1989 in a coup. They cancelled his funding for the university in Leeds. They demanded that he return immediately back to Sudan. At the time, communists were being murdered. Members of his party were being murdered. So he was advised, although he probably didn't need the advice, by Amnesty International and other organizations not to return. Leeds University very generously offered to cover the rest of his scholarship. So we went from arriving on a student visa to becoming refugees. So I was born in 1988, a year before the coup. My father had a student visa. The plan was always to return back to Sudan. And then I got refugee status as a child. We then became British citizens, all of us, me, my mum, and my sister. So that journey is something that I've always been aware of. Like a lot of children, you kind of reject the journey of your parents initially, but eventually the penny does drop. So my dad, I guess he had me a bit older, maybe not in modern terms, but back then he was about 40 when I was born. So by the time I was 10, he was 50. And he just used to talk about politics all day, every single day. In my house, it would be one news program finishing and another news program starting, English and Arabic. So politics was always, in the house, always being discussed. I don't think I enjoyed it when I was younger. I was more interested in football and other stuff. And then when you get older, you start to realize that everything's politics. Absolutely everything is politics. How you're treated at school, to the kind of decisions that you're made because of the hegemonic narrative placed on young black boys, especially growing up in the UK and much of the Western world. And so, yeah, I just started reading some of the books around, doing my own reading, going back to my dad with discussions when before I was not interested. And yeah, from then onwards, I feel like I've just become, in many ways, not become my dad, but had the same infliction that my father has. Because I remember being young, my mom would be at parties telling my dad, stop talking about politics. It's a party. People are trying to enjoy themselves. And I remember having like one of those moments with my wife, like stop talking about politics. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. This is interesting. So yeah, that was kind of my journey. A lot of things happened in my childhood. I got in a bit of trouble growing up. I got arrested a few times. I guess it's a bit cringy to say this, but I guess I wanted to be a bit of a bad boy, got involved in gangs. And then I just started to analyze, like, why am I doing all this type of stuff? My mom has got like 3 masters. My dad has got a PhD. I don't come from that type of household. It's like it was more of a want than a need. And then I start reading, the books, Frantz Fanon, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and just started realizing that this is, a form of neocolonialism in the mind in itself. The idea that we are kind of pigeonholed into a box, that we are kind of the ideas of the ruling class also become the ideas of the majority. And as a working class guy growing up in Birmingham in the UK, I feel like I inadvertently adopted a lot of these reactionary ideas. And it was only through reading, liberating the mind that I managed to basically do a complete U-turn on that.
Oh, interesting. But you still identified as working class, even though your mother had 3 masters and your father had a PhD.
Yes, because you go to the UK and all that doesn't matter. After my dad got his PhD, struggled to get work. My mom had, with her masters, had to do cleaning jobs. She eventually became a social worker for a short period of time, which I guess is a middle class job. But then just this year, she became redundant because Birmingham City Council has gone bankrupt. So now she's working part time as a receptionist. So you're always one kind of step away from poverty and desperation. So we struggled a lot growing up. We grew up in a council estate. School uniforms were kind of paid a bit later than they should have been. Just the typical experiences of many immigrant communities that move to the UK that can't necessarily rely on support from back home. In fact, it's the opposite. They're kind of the golden ticket and everyone's relying on them. But yeah, I wouldn't change anything about my upbringing. I say that with pride. I think having a working class background gives you a certain perspective and helps you move and maneuver in the world in a certain way. Now I've come to Kenya. I've obviously got more money than the majority, but I still have that perspective, that working class perspective. So, the way that I engage with people is very different to other people in maybe the same socioeconomic status.
Yeah, it's a really important context, I think, for how you got your worldview, and which I am fascinated to learn. Hopefully, you'll tell us how you got the idea for African Stream and how you launched it. But let me just go through some context for the audience so people understand the significance of African Stream. At the launch of African Stream, you stated that your aim was to create a news platform to define the African story in the African voice, with an emphasis on Africa on the rise. Now, obviously, to do that effectively, it would have to be an anti-imperialist perspective, in my view, that challenges Western narratives, something that was sorely needed then and is still very, very much needed now. At its peak, African Stream statistics were reported to be nearly 1 million TikTok followers, 300,000 Instagram followers, 460,000 subscribers on YouTube, and over 124 million views. That was the statistics I found. But granted, this is like a snapshot before it started to get deplatformed, which we'll get into later. But first, can you share with us how this all happened? Because it is genuinely a remarkable achievement.
Sure, sure. I'll just correct you on one thing. Instagram, we had 860,000 followers.
Oh, wow. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
No, it's all right. It's
The
all right.
internet is
And
lying to me.
yeah, yeah, and
Okay.
we were getting 40 million views per month. Majority of them were on Instagram, even though we had more followers on TikTok because of the algorithm. We were more popular and more influential on Instagram. But yeah, the journey, you summed it up pretty well. Firstly, Africa is probably the most misunderstood and neglected continent in terms of coverage, in terms of analysis, in terms of everything. There is BBC Africa, but it covers things on a surface level, always on a surface level. And I don't think it's because they can't go deeper, it's because they don't want to go deeper. The prevailing narrative is always, if you really analyze their story, and I do, it's a bit of a hobby of mine, it's always mismanagement of resources, bad governance, Africans, it's your fault. Yeah. You could strip all of that down. There's a new element that I've added. Things have got worse because Trump stripped away aid. That's the new kind of narrative they're running with. But for the last, at least since I've been paying attention, the last 15, 20 years, and definitely before that, that has been the prevailing narrative. And we really wanted to challenge that because, again, if you believe in these concepts, as an African, it doesn't leave you with much confidence in yourself. It doesn't leave you in much confidence in your community, in your family, in your nation. If you think, this is just the way it is, we're just not very good at managing ourselves. Maybe it was better when we were managed by others. And I just feel like the most important thing for a nation to have is belief in itself. So when we had a reporter in Burkina Faso, she's still there now, but obviously African Stream is no longer operating, but we're still in contact with her. And she's a staunch Pan-Africanist. She set up the Thomas Sankara Pan-African Library, and she set up another one in Niger. She's fantastic. She was born in the Bay Area. Someone that you should definitely get on your podcast. But anyway, we speak to her and we're like, so, she's on the ground. Why is there so much enthusiasm behind Ibrahim Traoré? And her response is, it's not that he does everything perfectly. It's the fact that they believe that he's trying. They believe that this is their country. Yeah. Before Ibrahim Traoré, it always felt like Burkina Faso and Niger and Mali was there to serve, Barrick Gold, Arania in France, all these multinational corporations, everyone apart from the people within those countries. So they believe that he's trying, and he's done certain initiatives that have shown that. And the development in infrastructure in a short period of time since the revolution that happened in 2022 has been remarkable, and people can see it. And people are volunteering themselves. There's a popular mobilization volunteer force that sleeps outside the presidential palace day and night almost. They obviously do it in shifts, but to protect their president because they believe in what's going on. So I say all that to say, when people believe in what you're doing, it goes a long way. I interviewed before, I didn't have a chance to interview him actually, Bernard Cord. He was the number 2 in Grenada during the Grenada Revolution. And he was saying, whatever budget they had to build roads, because the people were involved, if they had 9 kilometers, the people would help it go to 11 because, everyone would be involved. So the beauty when people believe in the collective effort can go a long way. And so that's what we were trying to do with African Stream. We weren't trying to make excuses. We called out bad governance. Of course we did. But we wanted to go a bit deeper and explain who this bad governance serves, who else is involved. Because in many ways, bad governance in Kenya, William Ruto, it's just middle management. Bad governance in Nigeria is middle management. These people are, if not inserted into power, allowed to become the president because they know, firstly, they'll serve their interest and definitely not threaten their interest. But yeah, the journey for African Stream, I was a journalist at Press TV for about 7 years in London. I appreciate my time there. I started as an assistant producer and just kept rising, became a producer, became an editor, became a senior journalist, senior correspondent, and managed to travel to many places. Did the documentary in Venezuela, went to Iraq, went to Nicaragua, did 2 documentaries from Sudan. Really appreciated my time, but it was always a struggle to get African stories. Even the Sudan documentaries, by the time I went, it was a few years after the revolution. I don't want to attack Press TV because I feel like it was an anti-imperialist media channel doing what they could, but their focus was more, of course, West Asia, the UK because we were there, and North America, at times South America. They just didn't feel like Africa was a hot topic. And then when I would do a story on Africa, it wouldn't get the traction, which would then reinforce their idea that this is not a hot topic. But my argument is because we do it once in a blue moon, so people are not coming to us for that. But I always believed that there was an audience that cared about what was going on in Africa if it was done well. I had a colleague at Press TV who at the time set up a Muslim publication, still operating today, dedicated to Muslim news. And it started to take off. And he was always encouraging me, saying, you should do this for Africa. You're always talking about Africa. You should do this for Africa. So then when the opportunity arose, I just took it with both hands. It was difficult to leave Press TV. You get very comfortable. I was part of the leadership there in the UK office. I could do what I want. I could pitch stories and go all over the world. I was in the UK, my family in the UK, but this was my calling and this is something that I always wanted to do. So we launched in September 2022. The first 6 months, 8 months, we got no traction at all. So much so that I'd be posting African Stream content in like family WhatsApp groups, friends WhatsApp groups. Could you like this post? Can you share this post? But we were undeterred because every now and again, someone would take our post and repost it on their platform and it would go viral.
Was it always like short form content?
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, it was actually, because the idea behind it was, like I said, by the end, I started to become a bit like my dad, where I'm talking about politics so much and people are like, I don't want to hear it, that kind of reaction. But I'd still keep going. So my idea was to create a platform that could reach those people, the ones that didn't want to hear it. My niece is 17 now. I think she was like 15 at the time. I was thinking of her, like, how would I reach a 15-year-old? How would I make something that someone that doesn't necessarily have the grounding in geopolitics and international politics or African history could understand in digestible form? So that was the idea. And that's why we put our energy primarily into Instagram and TikTok. And I think that's why we were so popular as well, because we weren't kind of using language or jargon that wasn't understood. So my biggest thing as an editor, when I'm editing the scripts and the documents and descriptions, I'd always type back to the journalist, I know what this word means, but not many people do. Pick another word. Yeah. So we're not trying to be above the people. We're trying to reach the people. That was the point of African Stream. Use as easy, accessible language, break it down. If you're going to say a massacre, you have to explain what happened and the date. Don't take it for granted that someone knows what that massacre was and when it happened. Explain everything. And we did that. And like I said, it wasn't popular at the beginning.
So it's about 8 months of no traction.
8 months of, really no traction. And then, I don't know how this happened. I've been told I shouldn't say this because I might get the celebrities in trouble, but I don't think I will. So I'm going to say it. But then a few influential Africans in America, what some call African American, what I call Africans in America, celebrities picked up our content and just started posting it. Even they have big followings, but it's more about who follows them. People that follow them also have big followings. So it kind of goes into an algorithm kind of whirlpool that is quite influential. So one of them, and I'm very grateful, was the rapper formerly known as Mostef, Yassine Bey. He was following us and I was like, wow, this is crazy. And then he started like sharing our stuff in the stories. Another one was the basketball player, NBA basketball player, Kyrie Irving. he started like posting and reposting our stuff, and he's huge, like has a huge following. And so I think I don't know why, maybe that was the reason we just started to pop. Maybe these cool people are following them, so maybe we'll follow them too. I don't know.
Well, it's just like it needed reach, you know? It's like you were saying, it would
Yeah.
have resonated if people saw it, but getting it out and beating the algorithm was the issue, right?
Exactly. And we didn't have any promotion budget or anything like that. So we were just like, we're just gonna post our content and just see how it goes. So we launched in September 2022, but it really started to launch off. I remember by December 2023, it was big. I remember there was a point where we reached 500,000 followers on Instagram, and I got the team a cake to say, congrats on reaching 500. By the time that the cake arrived and whatnot, we were on 600,000 followers. So we had to like just remove the 5 to the 6.
How big was your team?
In the office, we had 4 full-time journalists, around 4 video editors, and then we would just engage freelancers for just one-off pieces or maybe a couple of pieces a month. So it wasn't that big. But I guess the difference is, when I think about it, is most people that do this content, they do it part-time while they've got another job to pay the bills. So the power of 6, myself included, and the other manager of the team, 6 people, 6 Africans who are passionate, doing this every single day, thinking about it every single day, talking to each other, sharing ideas, that can go a long way. That can go a long way. So that's always my advice when people saying to me, I always get DMs like, I want to set something up like African Stream. I'm like, well, you need to do it full time. Otherwise, you'll never be on. It's a continent of 54 countries, 55, because obviously we recognize Western Sahara. To stay on top of that, and plus the diaspora, so the Caribbean countries and countries in African communities in the Americas, to stay on top of everything that's happening, you need to be doing it all the time. You can't be having a job, something else, and you're doing this on the evenings. It just doesn't work. So to December, we was really flying, but that was probably by February 2024. So there was a few international events that really catapulted us. Obviously, we had someone in Burkina Faso, so we were covering the events there. But then Niger, the coup, from day one, we were on it. And again, we had somebody, he was a freelancer, he was based in Burkina Faso, but he traveled to Niger, and he was able to explain to us very quickly what was going on and get us speaking to some comrades over there. So we were reporting with confidence at a time when people didn't really know. They were like, is this a reactionary coup? Is this a revolutionary coup? What's going on? And we realized very quickly that it was a revolutionary coup. That was actually one of the first big pushbacks that we got from our audience, the Niger coup. But then they came with us on the journey. So initially they were like, I'm so disappointed in African Stream. Why are you supporting these men in military uniform? And then obviously, as things progressed and they saw the French being kicked out, the American drone base being kicked out, the renegotiation of uranium deals, we were covering the protest as well. The tens of thousands of people that were filling up stadiums, tens of thousands of people on the streets. They basically came along with us on the journey. And basically, after 3 months, no one was saying that. Everyone was kind of on board and seeing what was going on.
But why were you able to see that immediately? Was it about the demands that they were making, or what was it that was clear to you?
Yeah, because again, it's access. It was the access. So we not only had full-time, she wasn't full-time, she was working us 3 days a week, three days out of 5. But not only did we have our correspondent in Burkina Faso, who was obviously speaking to people in Niger, but then we managed to get someone to Niger immediately. So this person would do vox pops for us he was a cameraman and a producer. He would do vox pops for us in Burkina Faso anyway. And then when this happened, I think day 1, I sent him a message that says, can you get to Niger? And he got there immediately. I spoke to him like at length, what's going on? Speak to as many people as possible. We need to understand what's happening. And then of course it's the demands, the statements that they made about why they did the coup, the response from Mali and Burkina Faso, the response from the reactionary states in the region. So Macron was pushing Nigeria to basically invade the country, because of coups. Macron has been backing Paul Biya, who's been in power in Cameroon for 40 years. So you're not concerned about democracy. There's something else going on. Yeah, and ECOWAS, which is also a reactionary organization of West African states, that Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the statements that were made by some of the progressive countries in the region, it was all signaling that this was something. There's been reactionary coups in the region, like Guinea has turned out to be a reactionary coup. There's no mass group of people on the streets. It's very difficult to get, people on the streets. In Sudan, where my family are from, just before the war, the army, which was trying to grab power, had to trick young people from a faraway region that there was a football tournament going on to make it look like there were protests happening. It was only because of citizen journalism, and people went up to them and said, like, what are you doing here? And they say, I thought I was coming for a football tournament. So it's very difficult, even when you're like a corrupt military dictatorship, it's actually very difficult to flood the streets with tens of thousands of people. And you can usually tell as well.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of times you have color revolutions across the world.
Mm,
And the Hong Kong protests, for example, is a color
yeah,
revolution. Nepal
yeah,
seems to be possibly a color revolution. Of course, it's a very recent events. And you see
yeah,
so many people. But I think one thing you pointed to is the demands. What are the demands that they're making? And are they
yes.
backing pro-US talking points? That's probably an indication.
That's an interesting point that you raised, but I'd suggest the difference is this. A color revolution is a sophisticated program, including National Endowment for Democracy and NGOs and, manipulation of media and paying journalists and to write stories. I think in Zambia, we did a report on it. I think they were paying journalists $1,000 per story to write anti-China stories, yeah, about how China's a problem in Africa. So it's a process. It's a long cultivated process. These countries in the global south, they don't have that sophistication of NGOs, of international media, of influencers, so they can't do what the US does in other countries, basically. So yeah, I agree. A color revolution happens and people do go out to the streets enthusiastically. But there's been a manipulation program happening for a significant amount of time before that happens. Yeah, laying the groundwork, laying the foundations, etc.
Thank you for watching the first part of our interview. Please head over to patreon.com/Empire Watch to watch the full episode. The podcast is also available as an audio on Spotify and Amazon Music every Saturday.